Welcome to Getting to Wellbeing. How did I get here? I'm Rochelle Ladravis, and this is my learning journey. And I'm going to go back to my title, How Did I Get Here? Because I didn't realize the things that had happened to me rolled into my adult life. But when I was younger, I had the opportunity to adopt a child. And this is my why. And I had already been a teacher for many years, and I definitely understood children that struggled. I understood them in a different way, and I never understood the reason. So let me get back to my daughter. I was actually separated and had the opportunity to adopt a child, and I decided that I would be a better single mom than a married mom. And so I started a journey with my daughter on my own. And the thing with her is that I had to decide, what kind of a life was I going to be able to offer this beautiful little bouncing baby that somebody else could or couldn't offer her. And so because of my childhood and traumas in my childhood, I vowed that she would not have any of those same traumas. So hence the deciding to adopt her as a single mom instead of a married mom. And so in that vow to be able to give her a life that was different from mine, and back then I didn't know anything about ACEs, I didn't know anything about childhood trauma. That first research was done in 1998, which would have been the same year my daughter was born. And so that obviously information wasn't out yet. But I just knew that the things that scared me in my childhood weren't going to be things that affected her childhood. Well, my next slide, I'm not going to spend much time on it because it does hold some very personal pictures, that aren't out there. And, remember, this is my journey. But one of the things that did happen to my daughter that happened to me at the same age, at 15, I lost my father. And at the same age, Emma lost her dad. So 3 years after adopting Emma, at 3 years old, was adopted again by my husband. We had found each other, and we created a family of 3. So Emma, from 3 years on, did grow up with a mom and a dad. So even after, getting married, it was still the same thought. I'm going to make sure that her childhood isn't anything like what my childhood was. And those were things, obviously, that were out of my control, but what I could control was going to be controlled. So when Emma was 15, we went through a very traumatic experience for almost 30 days. Very briefly, her father had a medical emergency that ended him up on life support and with about every kind of machine. He was either in it, on it, or hooked up to it. And this all happened out in Washington, D.C., so Emma actually wasn't with us. And, you can imagine having to wake up a 15-year-old and telling her that she has to get on a plane in 2 hours because her dad has had a very serious accident and might not make it. She might not make it there. And very close relationship between her and her dad. She was definitely a daddy's girl, and she told him everything. She was a mama's girl too, but she was a daddy's girl first. And so here is the next slide. So I'll just give you a warning that they might be small, but they're still, they can be some trigger pictures. So this is on the left pictures that Emma took with her dad. And this is how she saw him for the last 30 days of his life. And the last messages that they sent to each other, she put there in the middle. This was very traumatic. Absolutely very traumatic for both of us. And so, of course, you know, my whole focus turned to Emma and making sure that I continued this path of trying to give her life experiences that weren't traumatic. But the events of that month weren't anything I could take away, and they definitely affected her. And I think about my simple view of the brain, the three states of it: the executive, the emotion, and the survival. And what had happened to Emma in those 30 days definitely rewired her brain. Same girl, you know, full of life and full of joy and happy, but with that traumatic experience has come something that will never leave her. She and actually I were both diagnosed with PTSD, and my concern was for her, though, obviously first, and helping her to thrive and possibly get back to a brain that isn't affected by trauma, which, you know, knowing that's not going to ever happen. But it brought a lot of anxiety to her life. It brought a lot of changes to her life. And you look at these pictures here, and I look at them now, and what I see on the outside is so different than what I know is on the inside of this girl and what has happened to her. You know, that book, What Happened to You, is so important to look at somebody. And like I just said, these three pictures tell a completely different story on the outside than what they do on the inside of this young lady. So how I got here is throughout all of this, I knew something was different. I knew something was different about her. I was getting her help, and not until 6 months after did I start getting my self-help. And both being able to recognize something different in her, something different in me, not understanding why she was reacting the way she was reacting, the way I was reacting the way I was reacting. And at that point, neither one of us had been diagnosed. And soon after, Emma was diagnosed first. And then a couple months later, after starting my therapy, then I was diagnosed. And from there, this is where my learning journey really took off. And it was trying to understand the changes in her brain, because you couldn't just say, oh, come on now. This is a trigger for me. Put your big girl panties on. I had people actually say that to me. And, you know, hearing my story, I'm hoping that you're thinking, wow, how could somebody ever say that to you? And I do think about the way other people's brains work too. And obviously, they don't know the words that we don't know, the words that we say, and how they can impact somebody, because what you see here on the outside is so different than what could be potentially going on the inside. And so my journey of learning has taken me through a lot of books, a lot of trainings, and understanding the brain. So one of the things that does come with Emma is, I mentioned she was adopted. And when she was getting ready to be born, I knew that she could be a drug baby. I knew that there were potential risks that came with not knowing because of things that her mother and both biological mother and father had, I'll just say, dabbled in. So that came with a lot of questions there itself. And so now, like I said, I've done a lot of research about the brain and still on my journey, and I'm still doing that research. But my point of all of this on my journey is I really would just want people to take away that, I'm going to go back to that same comment. What you see here on the outside looks like somebody that, that can just walk into a room and have your attention in such a positive way. But what is happening on the inside is so different, and different from what it was 8 years ago. So this is her recently. So things do work out. Things do have happy endings. And we learn how to regulate, and we learn more about the brain and how to do those things. And then what ends up happening is that we get to a point where the next life is ready, to come. And so talking with her and the way that her brain has rewired, we really need to have those discussions about what that means for the brain to rewire, what happens when you're in a state of survival for so long, and how everything feels to you that it is a real tiger ready to pounce. And so in these discussions with her, it is a lot about what she is potentially bringing to the baby that she is carrying. And so the focus of all of my learning for recently has been towards her and helping her to understand what happened in her survival state where she was stuck and locked in, how that can pass on. And just because it was something that happened to you doesn't mean that it doesn't pass on, you as a mother carrying another child in the womb. And so, I always end with this. This is just about awareness. This is just about understanding. And I always like to end with this: lead with empathy. Because if I go back to those pictures about what you see on the outside isn't always what is on the inside. And if you look at everybody that is approaching you and you look at, oh, how beautiful that young man is and how nice that was, and yes, he says hello, and then you've got that student that walks by that has the hoodie over their head and they've got people hollering at them, get that hoodie off, no hats, that kind of stuff. And you don't know what's on that inside. So I always ask that we lead with empathy, and we lead with trying to understand where somebody might be coming from when we don't even know what their story is. So I leave you with that today.